Tonight on The Sleepy Scientist, we'll open the drawers of a forgotten observatory, tucked away where the stars shine quietest. Inside these drawers are no ordinary files, each one holds a lost experiment, a soft question the world forgot to answer. What if there were a mirror that refused to reflect your face, but showed who you were becoming? A clock that only ticked when you were at peace? A lantern that lit the path you feared the most? These are the delicate wonders waiting to be found. Follow Dr. Elia, a scientist who doesn't chase discoveries, she listens for them. Each chapter is a journey into forgotten wisdom, quiet courage, and the parts of us we often overlook. This story unfolds slowly, meant to soothe the mind, ease the heart, and guide you gently toward rest. So wherever you are, whether it's midnight or morning, take a deep breath, settle in, and let yourself drift into a world where science is soft, wonder is patient, and even the smallest drawer might open something in you. Welcome to the Library of Lost Experiments. The Observatory on the Hill. At the edge of a sleepy little town, tucked between tall pines and slow-moving fog, there stood an old building with a silver dome and weathered stone walls. Most people called it the observatory, though its telescope hadn't moved in years. Few knew that someone now lived there, quietly, gently, with notebooks and soft socks and a kettle that sang only when asked. Her name was Dr. Elia. She had a calm voice, the kind you could fall asleep to halfway through a sentence. And she had always believed that science wasn't just about answers. It was about wonder. Elia had come here to rest. Not just her body, but her mind. She had spent years in bright laboratories, loud universities, racing to discover something new. But here, there were no clocks. Just the wind, the trees, and the slow hush of time unfolding. She spent her mornings sipping tea on the balcony, watching clouds drift across the sky. In the afternoons, she read dusty books by the fireplace. And at night, she stared up at the stars, thinking not of galaxies, but of questions that didn't need answers right away. One chilly evening, as rain tapped gently on the glass dome above her, Elia wandered down a narrow hallway she hadn't noticed before. The air was cooler there. It smelled of paper, pine, and something else. Forgotten time. At the end of the hallway stood a tall oak door with no handle. Just a keyhole. And just beneath it, a plaque that read, "For those who wonder gently." Elia smiled. "I suppose that's me," she whispered. Later that night, she found a rusted old key in the drawer of her writing desk. She didn't remember putting it there. But when she held it in her hand, it felt warm. As if it had been waiting. The next morning, the door opened. Inside was a room filled not with books, but with drawers. Hundreds of them. All made of dark wood and soft brass, labeled with quiet words. The pendulum that fell upward. The river that burned cold. The clock that dreamed of sleep. Elia stepped inside. Everything smelled of old ink and ideas. The drawers held papers, notes, sketches, half-written experiments. Many unfinished. Some unread. It was not a library of knowledge. It was a library of questions. She sat at the small wooden desk in the center, opened the first drawer nearest her elbow, and read. Experiment number 1, a device to measure moonlight, through the rhythm of the human heart. She blinked. Then smiled. "I think," she said softly, "this will be my next adventure." The clock that measured moonlight. The drawer creaked softly as Dr. Elia pulled it open. Inside were pages the color of old linen, curled at the edges, smelling faintly of lavender and metal. Each sheet was covered in fine handwriting, careful, deliberate, and filled with wonder. The title, written in blue ink at the top of the first page, read, Experiment number 1. A timepiece for measuring moonlight via the human pulse. Dr. Aurelius Finch, 1874. Elia blinked, smiled, and leaned in closer. The experiment was strange, dreamy, almost poetic. Dr. Finch, it seemed, had believed that moonlight, not just sunlight, carried a kind of rhythm, like a slow breath or a sleeping heartbeat. He theorized that if one stood still beneath the full moon, barefoot on the earth, with a clock tuned to the resting pulse of the body, you could measure how moonlight moved through the sky. Not in minutes, but in feelings. One line in particular made Elia pause. Time, when filtered through moonlight, ceases to be strict. It becomes something softer, like memory. She rested her hand over the page. She wasn't sure if the experiment had ever worked. But something about it, its tenderness, its absurd beauty, felt true in its own way. She imagined Dr. Finch standing in a field over 100 years ago. Coat buttoned, face lifted toward the moon. Holding a pocket watch and listening not for ticks, but for stillness. That night, Elia wrapped herself in a shawl, lit a single lantern, and stepped outside into the garden. The moon was full. The grass was cold. She placed her hand on her chest and closed her eyes. Lube-dub. Lube-dub. Not fast. Not slow. Just there. Like the tide. Like the moon. She stayed like that for some time. Longer than she meant to. And when she finally went inside again, she didn't bother checking the clock. She didn't need to. Time felt different now. Not lost, just unhurried. At her desk, she wrote in her journal. Asterisk, perhaps the moon doesn't change time. Perhaps it only changes us. And we become gentler when we let light move slowly. Asterisk. She folded Dr. Finch's notes, returned them carefully to the drawer, and chose the next one. It was labeled, "The butterfly that could predict storms." The butterfly that could predict storms. The next morning, mist curled along the hilltop like breath, softening every edge of the world. Inside the observatory, Dr. Elia lit a small candle in the library. Its flame flickered gently, like a curious thought just waking up. She slid open the second drawer. Inside was a bundle of letters, tied with green thread, and a tiny pressed butterfly pinned to black velvet, its wings pale orange, freckled with gold spots, delicate as sleep. At the top, in flowing handwriting, the title read, Experiment Number 2. To detect the approach of storms by observing the wing beats of butterflies. Professor L. Morel, 1911. Elia unfolded the first letter. It began like a poem. I believe that nature knows. Long before thunder, before wind, a leaf will curl. A bird will fall silent. But it is the butterflies who always know first. Professor Morel had spent years in a forest observatory, watching butterflies. She noticed that just before storms, the insects didn't flee. They stilled. Their wings trembled less. Their flight paths shortened. Some didn't even rise from the grass. She recorded data obsessively. Temperature, pressure, humidity. But what mattered most, she wrote, was the rhythm of wings. Asterisk, I built a device, Morel said in one letter. A small chamber of silk and glass. When the butterflies flew slower, or paused their fluttering altogether, I knew to prepare for rain. Elia imagined it. A quiet woman in a wooden room, waiting for storms not with instruments, but with butterflies. And it worked, at least, she believed it did. But no one published her paper. It was dismissed as folklore. Filed away. Forgotten. Elia turned the velvet box in her hands. The butterfly's wings were still open, as if ready to rise again. She stood at the window. Outside, clouds were forming. Slow and silver, like thoughts too big to name. A breeze moved gently through the trees. Not wild. Not sudden. But present. And Elia, without checking the forecast, set a teacup on the sill to catch the rain she knew would come. Later, she wrote in her journal. Not all storms announce themselves loudly. Some arrive on small wings, with a hush instead of a howl. And there are those, like butterflies and quiet scientists, who know how to listen. She placed the letters gently back in their drawer, and then reached for the next one. Its label read, "The candle that burned without fire. The candle that burned without fire." That evening, the wind whispered through the rafters of the observatory like a lullaby. The sky outside was clouded, soft gray on gray, and the world seemed to be resting between breaths. Dr. Elia returned to the Library of Lost Experiments with a blanket over her shoulders and a notebook tucked beneath her arm. Tonight's drawer opened with a little sigh, as though it had been waiting patiently for a long, long time. Inside was a set of yellowed papers, a tiny frosted vial sealed with wax, and a fragile diagram of a candle, but not like any candle Elia had ever seen. This one had no wick. No flame. Just a strange mineral at the base, and words scribbled beside it. Experiment number 3. The candle that burned without fire. Silas Moreau, chemist, 1892. The notes were part poetry, part formula, part dream. I wish for a light that doesn't scorch. One that glows without harm. That warms without burning. And shines quietly in the dark. Silas Moreau had worked for decades to invent such a thing. Not for fame, but for his daughter, Lena, who had feared open flame since childhood. He studied luminescent minerals, bioluminescent fungi, even certain deep-sea algae, chasing a light that felt like moonrise, not fire. One formula, number 47, almost worked. He wrote of a faint glow that shimmered from a small clay bowl. After mixing the mineral in the vial with a trace of salt water, "It glows gently, like breath on glass," he wrote. "Enough to light a page. Not enough to hurt a hand." Elia gently lifted the vial from the drawer. It glittered faintly in the candlelight. Not glowing, but holding something quiet inside. Like the memory of light. She imagined Silas working by moonlight. His daughter, asleep nearby, while he chased a safer kind of brightness. For her bedtime stories. Not all scientists search for stars. Some search for softness. That night, Elia placed the vial beside her window. The moon peeked through the clouds and reflected in the glass. No light glowed from inside. But somehow, it felt warm anyway. She opened her journal and wrote. There is more than one kind of fire. And not all light is made to be seen. Some is meant only to be felt. She tucked the diagram back into its drawer. Then looked toward the next one. Its label was faint, but beautiful. The rain that sang in colors. The rain that sang in colors. The morning after the soft storm, everything at the observatory smelled of damp earth and pine needles. A hush lingered in the halls, as though the walls themselves had been listening to the rain all night. Dr. Elia moved slowly through the library, holding a mug of lavender tea. When she reached the next drawer, she found it unusually light. As if it held only air. Inside were 3 things. A torn field notebook, its pages rippled from moisture. A small vial of dried pigment, red, green, and violet swirled like sleeping clouds. And a hand-painted label. Experiment number 4. The rain that sang in colors. Dr. Uma Hart, acoustical botanist, 1928. Elia raised an eyebrow. Acoustical botanist? That was a title you didn't hear every day. She opened the notebook and read. Rain does not fall in silence. Beneath its tapping, beneath the rustle of leaves, there is a hidden sound. A tone. A frequency unique to each storm. Dr. Hart believed that rain produced subtle harmonic vibrations. And that under specific conditions, those vibrations could affect the way certain pigments responded to light, causing color shifts the human eye could just barely detect. She set up experiments in a greenhouse lined with canvas and glass. Each rainfall, she placed jars of mineral-based paints on the open sills. Then, she played tones, soft chimes, low hums, and whispers of wind. And some nights, when the conditions were just right, the paint changed. Not wildly. Not suddenly. But in a way she described as a mood shifting in the air. Green leaned bluer. Red softened to blush. Violet deepened like dusk. She believed she wasn't painting with water or brushes, but with the rain's song. Elia closed the notebook gently. She walked to the window and placed the vial of pigment on the sill. It didn't change, of course. But she imagined the rain returning. Soft and musical, brushing color into the world like a secret. That night, as she curled beneath a thick blanket, she wrote in her journal. What if every storm carries a secret symphony? Not to hear with ears, but to feel with color. With skin. With sleep. She yawned, stretched, and looked across the room. There was one more drawer glowing faintly in the candlelight. It read, "The plant that remembered moonlight. The plant that remembered moonlight." The candle on Dr. Elia's desk had nearly burned down to a pool of golden wax. Outside the observatory, mist hugged the ground like a sleeping blanket. And the stars blinked softly between clouds, like they, too, were drifting off. In the hush of that quiet night, Elia opened the next drawer. Inside, she found a velvet pouch, a folded letter, and a pressed leaf sealed in glass. The leaf shimmered faintly under the candlelight, its veins glowing silver, as if it had captured starlight long ago and never let go. The letter was labeled Experiment Number 5. The Plant That Remembered Moonlight. Dr. Margot Errol, lunar biologist, 1955. Dr. Margot had been a gentle researcher. More gardener than scientist, really. Who believed that certain plants did not just respond to light. They remembered it. Specifically, moonlight. She kept a greenhouse filled with wild herbs and flowering vines. Each night, she would leave one plant in darkness, and another under moonlight. For days, then weeks, and sometimes, months. She measured nothing at first. She just watched. Over time, something quiet began to happen. The plants exposed to moonlight, even after being brought back indoors, unfolded their leaves differently. Softer. Slower. As if swaying to an invisible rhythm. It's not photosynthesis, Margot wrote. It's something gentler. A kind of memory. A longing, perhaps, for the light that touched it once. She tested more plants. Lavender. Ferns. Moonflowers. And each time, she noted the same pattern. Subtle changes in leaf position. Slight delays in wilting. Gentler blooming. She called it lunar imprinting. A memory not in the brain, but in the body of the plant itself. Elia traced the pressed leaf with her finger. Even now, decades later, it held a kind of stillness. As if it remembered being bathed in moonlight long ago. She thought about her own memories. How some moments glowed, not because they were loud, but because they were quiet. Like moonlight. Gentle. Unforgettable. That night, she walked outside to her garden. The moon hung low and round above the treetops. She stood there for a long time, letting it touch her face, her hands, her breath. Not for study. Just for remembering. When she returned to her desk, she wrote. Some things remember light. Not with thought. But with presence. The way skin remembers a breeze. Or how dreams remember stars. She looked toward the next drawer. Its label was simple and strange. The wind that was never cold. The wind that was never cold. The next drawer opened without a sound. As if the air around it had been waiting for her touch. Inside was a weathered map, a compass made of wood and glass. And a long, narrow ribbon that shimmered faintly at its edges. The color of sunlight caught in fog. Tucked beneath the ribbon was a note, handwritten in neat, slanted script. Experiment number 6. The wind that was never cold. Professor Elias Rowe, atmospheric listener, 1932. Elia sat by the window, letting the soft night breeze drift through the open frame. She unfolded the letter carefully. The ink was slightly faded. But the words held warmth, like they had been written near a fire. Professor Rowe had not studied wind like other scientists. He didn't measure speed or temperature. He listened. Wind, he wrote, is not just motion. It is memory in motion. Some winds bring chill. Others bring calm. And some feel like home. He had traveled to mountaintops, valleys, forests, and deserts. Carrying his homemade, warmth compass and a field journal. But the warmth he sought wasn't physical. It was emotional. A feeling. A presence. Rowe believed that certain winds carried gentle stories. From oceans, from forests, from long-forgotten places. And when those winds touched you, you felt something familiar, even if you'd never been there before. The wind that was never cold, he wrote, is not made of heat. It is made of memory. Of lullabies sung long ago. Of campfires. And the hush of a mother's voice. Elia held the ribbon to her cheek. It had once been used by Rowe to listen to wind. Its shimmer would catch the breeze. And he would write what he felt, not what he measured. She closed her eyes. The wind that moved through the observatory wasn't warm. But it wasn't cold, either. It was gentle. She breathed it in. And she understood. Back at her desk, she wrote. Not all warmth comes from temperature. Some warmth lives in memory. In scent, in softness. In the breeze that reminds you of something you didn't know you missed. She gently returned the ribbon to its place. And reached for the next drawer. Its label read. The star that lived in a mirror. The star that lived in a mirror. Rain had come again in the night, falling gently against the dome of the observatory like soft fingers tapping glass. By morning, everything sparkled, trees dripping, windows misted, the sky a pale silver quilt. Dr. Elia brewed a warm cup of honeyed tea and made her way into the library. She walked slowly now, savoring the ritual of choosing a drawer. Each one felt like a tiny world. Today's label was both simple and strange. Experiment number 7. The star that lived in a mirror. Celestine Ardent, mirror astronomer, 1881. Elia opened the drawer. Inside was a round hand mirror, its surface slightly tarnished. And a velvet-covered notebook tied with a silk cord the color of moonlight. She turned the first page. Stars vanish when we close our eyes. But what if something remembered them for us? Celestine Ardent had been a dreamer of the sky. She believed that starlight was not just a beam of light, but a memory, a story traveling through space. Long after the star itself had faded. She designed mirrors that were specially curved and silvered. not to reflect her own face, but to catch the light of a single star. Each night, she would wait until the skies were clear, set up her mirror in the observatory, and trace one particular star across the sky. One star. One night. One mirror. Then she would cover the mirror gently with cloth, never looking into it again. I believe, she wrote, that the mirror holds the moment. Not the light itself, but the feeling of the star's gaze. And when you look into it, later, even years later, you might feel something flicker. Elia held the mirror now. Its edges were cold. The center, slightly warm. She angled it toward the window where the sky peeked through. Just clouds this morning. No stars. But somehow, it felt as if the mirror remembered them anyway. She didn't see anything unusual in the glass. No glow, no shimmer. Only her reflection, and something softer behind it. Like the memory of light. Faint. But there. She wrote in her journal. Perhaps stars do not disappear. Perhaps they live on. In mirrors. In water. In the quiet places we carry wonder. She placed the mirror gently back into its drawer. Then turned to the next one. Its label was quiet but intriguing. The silence that changed direction. The silence that changed direction. The observatory was quieter than usual. No birdsong, no breeze, just the gentle hum of the building itself. As if the walls, the beams, the air, were all holding their breath. Dr. Elia moved through the library with her tea in hand, wrapped in a shawl the color of dusk. She paused before a drawer that had no markings except for a small carved line, like a ripple in still water. Inside, she found a sealed envelope, an old audio reel, and a set of hand-drawn sound waves sketched in pale blue pencil. On the back of one page, in tidy, careful script, was written. Experiment number 8. The silence that changed direction. Dr. Simeon Wells, acoustic physicist, 1944. Elia sat by the window as light filtered in, soft and uncertain. She opened the envelope. We measure sound as it travels, Dr. Wells had written. But what about the absence of sound? Can silence move? Can it turn, bend, or follow us? He believed that silence wasn't empty. It was shaped. That when you walked into a room, you didn't just bring noise with you. You left trails of silence behind. Like footprints. Invisible. Fading slowly. Wells had designed a device that recorded silence. Not by capturing nothing, but by measuring how sound wanted to fill the space. He placed the device in old houses, abandoned libraries, forests after snowfall. He listened to how silence settled, and how, sometimes, it seemed to move away. Silence, I've found, he wrote, can drift. Not like smoke, but like a thought leaving the room. He once recorded a moment where silence bent around a person. As if avoiding them. As if it sensed their sadness. That moment stayed with him. Perhaps silence listens to us, he wondered. And chooses where to go. Elia set the page down and closed her eyes. She tried to listen to the silence of the observatory. It was different from other silences. Not heavy. Not hollow. Just, aware. Almost like a presence. She thought about how some silences comforted. And others whispered of something forgotten. She imagined them moving like soft rivers through the air. Finding places to rest. That night, in her journal, she wrote. We often run from silence. But perhaps it runs toward us. Bending softly around our noise. Waiting for us to grow still enough. To hear it. She tucked the soundwave sketches back into the drawer. then reached for the next one. Its label read, "The pebble that fell upward." The pebble that fell upward. It had been raining softly for most of the afternoon. The observatory windows were dotted with droplets, each one catching the pale gray sky like tiny curved mirrors. Everything felt slow, wrapped in hush. Dr. Elia sat beside the tall bookshelf with a soft blanket across her lap. She reached for the next drawer, slightly heavier than the rest. It opened with a wooden sigh. Inside was a polished river pebble, a small leather notebook, and a faded photograph of a man standing on a cliff, his coat fluttering like a question caught in the wind. The label read, "Experiment number 9. The pebble that fell upward." Dr. Henrik Lauren, quiet physicist, 1923. Elia turned the first page of the notebook. "Gravity, we believe, always pulls downward," Lauren had written. But what if, just once, it paused? Hesitated? Or even reversed? Dr. Lauren had spent most of his life studying motion. But not the grand, explosive kind. He studied small things. The fall of leaves. The drift of dust. The way snowflakes spiraled as if dancing with invisible partners. He once wrote that he believed gravity had moods. That it, too, was tired sometimes. Gentle. Distracted. One winter morning, while walking beside a glacial lake, he picked up a smooth, flat pebble and tossed it into the air. Instead of falling, it hovered. Just for a moment. Then, impossibly, it rose. Not like it was being thrown, but as if it had been invited upward. He recorded the moment in stunned, careful notes. "It lifted like a breath," he wrote. "Not with force, but as if something above wanted to hold it." Elia held the pebble in her palm now. It was cool and unremarkable. But she imagined what it would feel like to see something small defy the rules. Quietly. Without needing to explain. Maybe it wasn't about gravity changing. Maybe it was about grace. She wrote in her journal that night. Some things fall. Some rise. And some, just once, drift free. Unburdened by what the world expects. She returned the pebble to its velvet pouch. And looked toward the next drawer. Its label glimmered softly in the firelight. The clock that dreamed of sleep. The clock that dreamed of sleep. It was nearly midnight when Dr. Elia reached the next drawer. The moon was high, casting soft silver through the old observatory windows, touching every surface like a whisper. The drawer opened with a gentle click. Inside was a brass pocket watch, warm to the touch despite the cool air. Beside it sat a single sheet of parchment and a folded diagram etched in soft graphite. At the top of the parchment, in curling letters, was written, "Experiment number 10. The clock that dreamed of sleep." Horologist Jules Ansel, 1879. Jules Ansel was not only a clockmaker. He was a philosopher of time. He believed that clocks, like people, were never meant to run endlessly. Even time, he once wrote, should be allowed to rest. He set out to build a clock that didn't measure time, but mirrored it. One that slowed down when the world grew quiet, and paused when the heart was at peace. The diagram Elia held showed something remarkable. A clock powered not by gears alone, but by stillness. It used a sensor, primitive but delicate, that responded to silence, breath rate, and softness of light. The calmer the space around it, the slower it ticked. And when the world around it slept completely, so did the clock. It would stop and rest, like a companion who didn't want to disturb your dreams. Jules had called it his compassionate timekeeper. "Let those who rest," he wrote, Do so without being reminded of passing hours. Let time sleep with them. Elia held the little pocket watch in her hand. It wasn't ticking. It hadn't in decades. But it didn't feel broken. It felt asleep. And somehow, that felt more comforting than if it had been working. She didn't wind it. She didn't disturb it. She simply placed it on her windowsill beside her candle. And watched the flame flicker gently beside it. That night, she wrote softly in her journal. Not all clocks are meant to count. Some are meant to wait. To sleep. And to remind us that we, too, may rest without guilt. She smiled to herself. Then reached for the next drawer. Its label glimmered like starlight on still water. The cloud that forgot how to rain. The cloud that forgot how to rain. The next morning, the sky above the observatory hung thick with gray clouds. But not a drop of rain fell. It was the kind of day where everything felt paused. As if the sky was holding something back. Dr. Elia moved through the quiet hallways. Her notebook pressed gently to her chest. And opened the next drawer in the library. Inside, she found a small, sealed glass jar. Half filled with air, or perhaps memory. And a stack of weather charts marked with delicate watercolor swirls. There was also a letter, with a name she didn't recognize. Experiment number 11. The cloud that forgot how to rain. Dr. Amara Vale, Sky Listener, 1904. Elia sat by the open window, letting the cool air drift across her hands. And began to read. Dr. Amara Vale had spent most of her life not chasing storms. But watching the ones that never came. She studied clouds that hung too long. Low and heavy. Full of water, but silent. Some clouds are not lazy, she wrote. They are grieving. Full to bursting. But unsure how to let go. She began to document these silent clouds. Not just their shape or altitude. But their presence. She listened for static. Measured the scent of the air. Tracked the shifts in bird calls and tree movement. There is a difference, she said. Between clouds that won't rain. And clouds that can't. Her theory was strange, but beautiful. That certain clouds gathered over places that had held too much sorrow. Old battlefields. Empty homes. Places of long-forgotten waiting. And that somehow, the clouds remembered. Maybe they do not know how to let go, she wrote. Maybe they wait for someone to say it's okay. Elia turned to the sealed jar. It held nothing obvious. Just air. But the label read. Cloud 7, did not rain. Stayed 3 days. Left at dawn. Birds returned in the afternoon. She looked out the window. The clouds above were still heavy, unmoving. She didn't wish them away. Instead, she whispered softly. It's okay. You can let go. A breeze stirred the leaves below. And for a moment, she thought, maybe. She heard the first drop. Later, in her journal, she wrote. Not all storms are loud. Some arrive quietly. And ask for permission. To fall. She tucked the letter back in its place. And reached for the next drawer. Its label read. The feather that refused to land. The feather that refused to land. Dr. Elia stood by the tall window of the observatory. Watching the breeze stir the tops of the trees. A few golden leaves twisted in the air. But none of them touched the ground. There was a lightness in the world today. As though something was trying to stay just a little longer. Before it settled. She turned to the next drawer, its surface worn smooth from time. When she opened it, a soft breeze swept through the room. even though the window was closed. Inside was a single white feather, suspended inside a thin glass tube. No dust. No markings. Just a perfect stillness. Underneath it was a small notebook and a weathered tag. Experiment number 12. The feather that refused to land. Dr. Ada Wren, ornithologist and skywatcher, 1888. Elia gently opened the notebook. The handwriting was loopy, thoughtful, filled with curiosity. I followed the feather for 42 days, Ada Wren had written. It did not fall. It did not rise. It drifted. Like it was thinking. Dr. Wren had first seen the feather while walking through a quiet valley in early spring. She watched it hover just above the grass. Then catch a breeze, and disappear into the sky. Over the next several weeks, she spotted it again. In towns hundreds of miles apart. On hillsides, near rivers, across distant plains. It was always just out of reach. Always moving as if pulled by some invisible thread. It seemed less like a falling object, she wrote. And more like a message. She asked herself. What if some things in nature don't obey gravity, not because they can't, but because they won't? What if this feather carried not just air, but intention? When she finally caught it, gently, using a hand-carved wind cage, she placed it in the glass tube, hoping to preserve its strange stillness. To her amazement, it didn't settle. It hovered, just a little. As if it still remembered how to float. As if it was waiting to be released. Elia held the tube up to the light. The feather remained perfectly suspended. Neither resting at the bottom nor touching the sides. She smiled, not because she understood it, but because she didn't need to. Some things are meant to defy rules. Simply by being gentle and free. That night, in her journal, she wrote. Not everything that falls wants to land. Some drift not to arrive, but to be felt. She set the feather gently back into its drawer. And turned to the next. Its label was quiet and soft. The rock that grew lighter in the dark. The rock that grew lighter in the dark. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the air crisp and clear. Everything smelled faintly of moss and stone. As if the earth had exhaled. Dr. Elia moved through the observatory library with soft footsteps. Her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. This morning, she felt drawn to something heavier. Something grounded. She opened the next drawer, expecting to hear the gentle clink of stone. But there was only a whisper, a quiet shift of weight. Inside lay a smooth, charcoal-gray rock. No larger than her hand. Beside it, a tattered field log wrapped in wax paper. Its label read. Experiment number 13. The rock that grew lighter in the dark. Dr. Elias Rowe, night geologist, 1912. Dr. Rowe had lived in a small cabin in the mountains, where the stars felt almost close enough to touch. He studied the way rocks responded to temperature, humidity, sound. But mostly, he studied how they responded to darkness. One evening, while cataloging stones near a glacial stream, he noticed something peculiar. A rock he had weighed earlier that day felt lighter in his hand after sunset. At first, he assumed it was a trick of the cold. But he measured again, carefully, using weighted scales. And again the next night. And again the night after. The difference was tiny. Barely a whisper of weight. But it was consistent. Each day, the rock weighed more. Each night, it shed a small, immeasurable heaviness. As if letting go of something it carried. While the world slept. Not all burdens are visible, Rowe wrote. Perhaps the earth, too, knows how to rest. When the lights go out. He built a chamber of velvet-lined stone, where he kept the rock in total darkness for a full week. By the end, he said, it felt light as a breath. Not because its mass had changed, but because it had become peaceful. Elia held the stone now. It was cool in her palm. Strangely comforting. It reminded her of the way sadness sometimes lifts at night. Not because it disappears, but because the quiet makes room for it to float. She wrote in her journal. Maybe some things grow lighter. Not when we carry less, but when we stop fighting gravity. She placed the rock gently back in its nest of cloth, and turned to the next drawer, where a silvery envelope waited beneath a spray of dried grass. Its label read, "The song that could not be recorded." The song that could not be recorded. The wind had quieted. The fire in the observatory hearth had burned down to soft orange embers. Everything was still, so still, in fact, that Dr. Elia thought she might hear the stars humming if she listened hard enough. She walked slowly to the next drawer, drawn by a feeling she couldn't quite name. Like a note she remembered hearing in a dream. Inside, nestled in a velvet-lined case, was a small metal audio reel, a cracked headphone set, and a single envelope tied with faded twine. Its label read, Experiment number 14. The song that could not be recorded. Dr. Sylvie Moreau, acoustic biologist, 1965. Elia sat down beside the phonograph. The old machine was delicate, but still worked. She gently placed the reel in its cradle. But before pressing play, she opened Dr. Moreau's letter. It was written in looping cursive, the ink slightly smudged in places. I spent 12 summers in the marshes, tracking a song that no microphone could ever hold. Dr. Sylvie had heard it for the first time at dusk. A sound that floated between the reeds. A voice not quite bird, not quite wind, not quite anything at all. It was a melody, she wrote. So clear, so full, that I felt it settle behind my ribs, like a second heartbeat. She tried, for years, to capture it. She used every recorder she could find. Tape decks, parabolic microphones, underwater hydrophones. But when she played them back, there was nothing. Only wind. Or the distant murmur of frogs. Never the song. And yet, each year, she heard it again. At the same time. In the same place. Always just as the sun touched the water's edge. It was a kindness, she wrote. Not meant to be kept. Only experienced. Elia pressed play. As expected, the reel offered only a soft rustle. No song. But even as she sat in that quiet room, she felt something strange. A warmth. A hush. A note, not in her ears, but somewhere deeper. Almost like memory. Or breath. She picked up her pen and wrote softly in her journal. Some beauty isn't made for keeping. It only visits. Like dusk. Or a dream. She returned the reel to its case. And looked to the next drawer. Heart already drifting. Its label shimmered faintly in the candlelight. The raindrop that stayed whole. The raindrop that stayed whole. It was the kind of morning where time seemed to stretch. The rain had returned, not heavy, but quiet, like a lullaby. Each drop tapped gently against the domed ceiling of the observatory. Like fingers drumming on a book that hadn't been opened in years. Dr. Elia walked slowly, her slippers barely making a sound on the old wooden floor. She felt drawn toward the center drawer of the eastern wall. One that hadn't caught her attention before. Inside, wrapped in layers of wax paper, was a small glass dish. In the center of the dish sat a single, perfect raindrop. It did not roll. It did not flatten. It simply rested, whole, round, and still. Tucked beside it was a sheet of water-damaged paper, still legible. Experiment number 15. The raindrop that stayed whole. Dr. Mira Ellen, fluid physicist, 1937. Elia held her breath as she read the note. Dr. Mira had been fascinated not with the storm, but with the moment just after it. When the rain had passed, and everything was still. She believed that some droplets, just a few, held their shape longer. Because they weren't simply water. They were memory. A raindrop, Mira wrote, is a traveler. It falls through layers of sky. Passing birdsong. Radio waves. And silence. By the time it reaches us, it carries a story. Mira had created a special kind of dish. Its surface so smooth, so delicately curved, that it cradled one drop, without disturbing it. She called it her listening bowl. Because, she said, a drop only stays whole when it feels heard. This particular raindrop had fallen during a spring storm. And never evaporated. Never broke. Never slid away. I spoke to it, Mira confessed in her notes. I whispered my quietest questions. And it listened. It didn't answer. But it didn't leave. Elia leaned close. She could see the reflection of her own eye in the drop. Tiny, curved, and flickering like a distant moon. She didn't try to touch it. She didn't try to explain it. She just sat beside it. Feeling the kind of stillness that only water seems to understand. Later that evening, in her journal, she wrote, maybe the smallest things are the ones most willing to stay. If we're soft enough not to ask them why. She gently closed the drawer, as if tucking the drop back into sleep, and turned to the next. Its label, etched faintly in silver, read, "The compass that pointed to comfort." The compass that pointed to comfort. A hush had settled over the observatory. Not the silence of absence, but the kind that feels like something gentle watching over you. Dr. Elia moved slowly through the long hallway of drawers, each one holding the echo of a mind that had dared to wonder differently. She stopped at a drawer that felt unusually warm to the touch, as if someone had only just opened it. Inside lay a small brass compass, its glass face slightly fogged with age. But the needle didn't spin toward north. It pointed slightly to the left of the library's window, where a well-worn reading chair and a folded blanket waited in a patch of morning light. A folded note beneath the compass read, Experiment number 16. The compass that pointed to comfort. Dr. Theo Marin, emotional cartographer, 1958. Elia settled into the chair where the compass seemed to lead, and began to read the note aloud to herself in a whisper. Traditional compasses point to magnetic north, Theo wrote. But I believe every person has their own version of true north. Not a direction, but a feeling. A place inside or outside of them, where they feel safest. He called it the comfort field. And he believed that, if measured with care, a compass could be tuned not to the earth's pull, but to the pull of the heart. Dr. Marin's compass contained a small chamber with a fragment of locket, a pressed wildflower, and a curled strand of wool from his grandmother's shawl. Each element, he explained, held a memory of comfort. A scent, a warmth, a silence. When people held the compass, it slowly began pointing toward something they needed. A room. A quiet chair. A person. A particular book. Or even the sound of their own breath in stillness. It does not guide you to where you're supposed to be, Theo wrote. It guides you to where you can rest. Elia closed her eyes and let the needle settle. It pointed toward a small wooden alcove at the back of the library, where the oldest books were kept, books that smelled of sleep and paper and time. She followed. And when she sat there, between the shelves, something inside her sighed. Not from sadness. From release. That night, in her journal, she wrote. Maybe direction isn't about where we go, but where we feel most human. Most held. Most home. She placed the compass back in its drawer. Its needle gently drifting again. Already seeking the next softness. The next drawer's label read. The photograph that took itself. The photograph that took itself. The sky had turned the color of parchment. A soft, faded gold that seemed to drift through the observatory windows. Without needing to knock. Dr. Elia moved quietly along the eastern wall. Her fingers brushing the edges of each drawer as if greeting old friends. She paused at one with a brass keyhole, unlocked. And opened it gently. Inside lay a sepia-toned photograph. Slightly curled at the corners. The image was soft and dreamlike. An empty bench beneath a blooming tree. Dappled in light that didn't match the shadows. Beneath the photo sat a worn leather pouch. With a small, antique camera inside. Its shutter was cracked, its lens a little clouded. There was no film. But the drawer also held a handwritten letter, fragile but intact. Experiment number 17. The photograph that took itself. Dr. Myra Solon, temporal artist, 1922. Dr. Myra was a physicist who had once studied time, but who later fell in love with light. And how it lingered in places where memories once lived. She believed that some light didn't travel straight. It wandered. It hesitated. It stayed behind. In rooms where laughter had echoed. Or on benches where someone once waited with love in their hands. She built a small device, a camera of sorts. But without a trigger. No button. No timer. It was designed not to capture now, but to wait for light that remembered something. Dr. Solon left the camera on a bench in a quiet field. For a full season. And one day, she found the photograph developed inside it. A moment no one had pressed the shutter to capture. A memory the light had taken for itself. It is not a picture of what was there, she wrote. But of what the air still misses. Not proof. But presence. Elia studied the photo again. The shadows bent at odd angles. There was no person. But somehow, you could feel someone had once waited there. And loved there. She did not try to explain the science. Not tonight. She simply wrote in her journal. Some moments stay long after they've ended. Not in objects. But in light that still remembers. How it felt. To be seen. She placed the photo gently back into the drawer. And turned to the next. Its label read softly. The thread that tied two dreams together. The thread that tied two dreams together. Night had deepened. The observatory lights were dimmed to a soft amber. Casting long shadows that flickered like slow-moving memories. Rain tapped against the roof like a lullaby with no chorus. Dr. Elia moved quietly, barefoot. As though the floor might remember every footstep taken in wonder. She opened the next drawer, slightly narrower than the others. Inside was a pair of soft-bound notebooks. Worn at the edges, their pages marked with different handwriting. Between them was a spool of deep blue thread. Wound tightly, with one strand stretching out. As if still reaching. The label, almost embroidered into the paper, read. Experiment number 18. The thread that tied two dreams together. Dr. Anya Feld, Dream Correspondent, 1982. Elia opened the first notebook. It belonged to a man named Emile, a lighthouse keeper in northern France. The second belonged to a woman named Layla, a textile artist in New Zealand. They had never met. They had never spoken. But their dreams had begun to match. Saw the red boat again tonight, Emile wrote. Docked at the wooden pier with the lantern hanging. The air smelled like oranges. Woke up from the same harbor again, Layla noted weeks later. There was a red boat. The pier creaked. I think someone was waiting. The dreams continued. Always the same places. A field of lamps. A spiral staircase in the clouds. A library with no walls. And sometimes, though never clearly, they saw each other. Dr. Anya Feld had come across their journals by accident. Through a misdelivered letter. She noticed the similarities in their dreamscapes. And asked both participants to document their sleep for 30 nights. The results were impossible. Parallel dreams. Shared weather. Matching imagery. And in both notebooks, on the same night, appeared a sketch of a glowing thread. A blue thread. Floating in the air. Leading them both toward the same door. I felt like someone was pulling gently from the other side. Layla wrote. It wasn't frightening, Emile noted. It felt like belonging. Dr. Feld preserved the thread they both described. A ceremonial thread from Layla's loom. Sent by post across the sea. And placed beside Emile's bed. After that, their dreams slowly faded apart. But neither ever forgot. And both said their sleep had become gentler. Elia held the blue thread now. It was soft. And warm. Like something that remembered. Being part of something larger. In her journal that night, she wrote. Maybe dreams don't only live in us. Maybe they pass between us. Like quiet letters. Tied with thread. She returned the notebooks to their place. Tucked the thread in safely. And turned to the next drawer. Its label was delicate and faint. The bell that rang for one listener only. The bell that rang for one listener only. The wind had quieted. All that remained was the hush of the observatory. Deep, contented silence. The kind that makes space for small wonders to be heard. Dr. Elia moved gently through the library. Each drawer like a chapter in a book you read slowly on purpose. She stopped before one that shimmered faintly in the lamplight. When she opened it, she felt something shift. As if the very air in the room held its breath. Inside was a small silver bell. No bigger than a walnut, resting in a velvet-lined box. Its surface was smooth, untouched by time. But its clapper was still. Next to it lay a yellowed letter and a pair of folded paper earplugs. The label inside read. Experiment number 19. The bell that rang for one listener only. Dr. Milo Wren, Sonic Isolationist, 1946. Elia sat down by the window and opened the letter carefully. Dr. Milo Wren had spent his life studying sound that didn't follow rules. He believed that some vibrations didn't spread outward. They tunneled inward. And could choose who they touched. He designed a bell made of silver harvested from a meteorite fragment. Not for its beauty. But for how it held silence differently than earthly metal. Then, one night during a lightning storm, he rang the bell. His assistant, only feet away, heard nothing. But Milo. I heard the clearest chime, he wrote. Not through my ears. But in my chest. Like a memory I'd never made. Returning home. He tested it dozens of times. And always. Only one person could hear it. If two people stood nearby. The bell stayed quiet. But if one stood alone, it would sing to them. Gently, briefly. And only once. It is a sound, Milo theorized. That does not need to be shared. It chooses a listener. A moment. A soul. Elia held the bell softly in her palm. She did not ring it. Not yet. Instead, she placed the folded earplugs on the windowsill. Just in case. Then she closed her eyes and waited. For nothing in particular. And in that quiet waiting, she felt a single tone shimmer through her ribcage. Bright, weightless. And gone. Later, she wrote in her journal. Some messages are meant not to be heard by the world. Just by you. She returned the bell to its case. Feeling somehow more whole than she had moments ago. The next drawer whispered its name before she even touched it. The door that appeared in dreams. The door that appeared in dreams. Dr. Elia awoke just before dawn. Not startled, not disturbed, just quietly aware. As though her dreams had whispered her name and then gently let her go. She made tea in the small kettle tucked in the corner of the observatory. Then walked barefoot across the floor, steam curling in the air beside her. This morning, she felt like she had already been somewhere. When she opened the next drawer, she wasn't surprised to find a sketch. It was a drawing of a door. Or rather, the door. Familiar. Even though she had never seen it with her waking eyes. The file inside was thick with clippings, letters, and handwritten notes. The label read: Experiment number 20. The door that appeared in dreams. Dr. Ezra Kalin, sleep cartographer, 1975. Dr. Ezra had been a sleep researcher who'd begun noticing strange patterns in unrelated patients. People who didn't know each other. Different ages, countries, languages. But many spoke of the same image. A tall, narrow door, standing upright on its own. Wooden, pale. No handle. Just a keyhole. It never opened. But I always wanted it to. Ezra began collecting these accounts. More than 90 over the course of 6 years. Each dreamer described a slightly different setting. A forest, a hallway, a shoreline, even the middle of a classroom. But the door remained the same. Same dimensions. Same grain in the wood. Same inexplicable pull. It felt like it knew me, one person wrote. Like it was waiting for me to remember the key. One dreamer, a young boy, drew the door from memory. And when Ezra showed him a sketch made by a woman from across the world, he smiled. That's the one. But no one ever saw it open. They all woke up just before. Or turned away. Or blinked, and it vanished. Ezra wondered. Was it a shared symbol? A universal threshold? Or something older, an ancient invitation we're still learning to answer? In a final note, Dr. Ezra wrote. Maybe we all carry a door we haven't opened yet. And when we rest, we come closer to the moment we might try. Elia looked again at the sketch. She felt her heart pull gently toward it. And though she had never stood before that door, not truly, she knew what it might feel like. She lit a candle and set the drawing beside it, watching how the flame made the lines ripple like memory. Then she wrote in her journal. Some doors don't need a room behind them. Sometimes, the wanting itself is the beginning of something true. She let the candle burn down halfway before turning to the next drawer. Its label was quiet, careful, and small. The mirror that refused to reflect faces. The mirror that refused to reflect faces. The observatory was hushed beneath a sky full of early stars. each one blinking slowly like they were drifting off to sleep. A quiet breeze wound through the open window, carrying with it the scent of night rain and old paper. Dr. Elia, wrapped in her soft shawl, stood before a drawer that looked perfectly ordinary. Unmarked wood, brass handle, a bit of dust on the edge. But as she opened it, she felt the faintest flicker, like a thought she hadn't had yet. Inside was a framed mirror, no larger than a notebook. Its glass shimmered faintly, as though it didn't entirely belong to the present moment. Next to it lay a sealed envelope and a folded linen cloth. The label inside the drawer read, "Experiment number 21. The mirror that refused to reflect faces. Dr. Juno Bellamy, optical anthropologist, 1908. Elia unwrapped the mirror slowly. And before even holding it up, she noticed something strange. The surface showed the room perfectly. The table, the lamp, the candlelight, the edge of her teacup. But when she leaned in closer, her face wasn't there. Not blurred. Not distorted. Just missing. Like she was present. But not the kind of presence the mirror wanted to acknowledge. She opened Dr. Bellamy's letter and read aloud softly. "I built this mirror from obsidian and salt glass," she wrote. "But I did not make it to reflect beauty. I made it to reveal essence." Dr. Juno had spent years studying how mirrors affected perception. Not just how we see ourselves, but how we come to believe what we are. She wondered, if a mirror chose not to reflect your appearance, what would it reflect instead? She began to notice strange behavior. The mirror worked, reflected spaces, objects, even animals. But never faces. Even when placed in front of a crowd, the faces would vanish, replaced by a faint shimmer. As if the mirror chose to withhold recognition. "It does not deny identity," she wrote. It merely reminds us. You are not your reflection. You are what's left when the image is gone. Elia held the mirror again. She turned it slightly. She could see the books, the light, her own hands. But not her eyes. Not her expression. And yet, she felt more seen than she had in a long time. Not as a figure, but as a feeling. That night, in her journal, she wrote, "Perhaps we spend too long wondering how we appear. And not enough time remembering how we feel. When no one is watching." She wrapped the mirror carefully in the linen cloth, tucked it back into the drawer, and turned to the next. Its label was faded but intact. "The clock that only moved when you felt peace." The clock that only moved when you felt peace. The rain had stopped. But its rhythm lingered, like a song that continued in the walls and the windows. Long after the final drop had fallen. Dr. Elia moved slowly through the observatory, drawn to the soft tick of memory. But when she reached the next drawer, there was no ticking at all. Just stillness. Inside, cushioned in wool, sat a small brass clock, delicate, elegant. Its face marked with hand-painted numerals and a single golden second hand. The hands were still, frozen at exactly 3:17. Beside the clock lay a soft leather-bound notebook. The label inside the drawer read, "Experiment number 22. The clock that only moved when you felt peace. Dr. Naeem Halbier, chrono-emotive engineer, 1929. Elia turned the pages carefully. Dr. Naeem had not designed the clock to measure time as it passed. He wanted to measure the quality of time. Not its length, but its texture. "There are hours," he wrote, "that last forever in pain. And moments that vanish in joy." So, he created a clock that responded not to gravity or gears, but to peace. Not joy. Not distraction. Not even stillness. Peace. That quiet space when the heart loosens. The breath softens. And the self forgets to defend itself. He tested it across a year. With people of all ages. Some made it tick by meditating. Some by holding hands. One child made it tick by holding her dog close. Another man sat for hours and couldn't move the hands at all. Until he forgave someone. And it began to turn. Peace is not the absence of noise, Naim wrote. But the presence of nothing asking to be more than it is. Elia held the clock gently and sat on the rug beside the window. She didn't try to force it. Didn't try to breathe a certain way. She simply watched the stars return between clouds. And let herself feel small. But safe. For a moment, she forgot she had anything to prove. And in that quiet, she heard it. Tick. Then silence. Tick. Just once every few breaths. She smiled. In her journal that night, she wrote. Maybe time doesn't heal all things. But perhaps peace gives time permission to begin. She returned the clock to its soft lining. And watched the second hand settle gently into stillness again. Then she turned to the next drawer. Its label glimmered faintly in silver ink. The plant that grew toward kindness. The plant that grew toward kindness. The air inside the observatory was unusually still. A stillness that felt almost alive. Like everything in the room was waiting. Not for something loud. But for something gentle. Dr. Elia moved toward the next drawer. Her fingertips warm from holding her tea. She opened it slowly and found a glass terrarium tucked inside. Inside the terrarium was a delicate, winding vine. Its leaves soft as velvet. Its color a deep, mossy green. Its stem curved gently to the side. Curved toward the space. Where her hand had just hovered. Beside the terrarium sat a tiny set of notes. Pressed petals, and a pale envelope with hand-drawn illustrations. The label, painted in soft strokes, read. Experiment number 23. The plant that grew toward kindness. Dr. Saya Milani, Botanical Empath, 1911. Elia sat down at the reading table and opened the envelope. Dr. Saya had been a botanist who believed that plants responded not only to sunlight and water, but to feeling, to intent, to the quiet energies of the people who cared for them. What if a plant could tell the difference? Saya wrote. Between a hand that reaches in curiosity and one that reaches with care. She experimented for years, testing dozens of sprouting species. But one, known only in her notes as number 7L, responded in ways that defied explanation. It didn't grow toward light, or sound, or even warmth. It grew toward kindness. Dr. Saya's records showed that the plant's leaves consistently turned, over days and weeks, toward the person in the room who spoke gently, who didn't rush, who offered no harm, only presence. If someone raised their voice or moved sharply, the plant would slowly curl away. But if someone simply sat nearby, calm and open-hearted, the vine would lean toward them. Even if no light was there. It taught me, Saya wrote. That kindness is not invisible. It leaves trails. And some things, quiet, rooted things, learn to follow it. Elia placed her hand near the glass. She didn't speak. She didn't even smile. She just let herself feel what she felt. A quiet admiration for a thing that chose to trust softness over anything else. And slowly, so slowly, one leaf unfurled toward her. In her journal that night, she wrote. Maybe kindness isn't something we give. Maybe it's something we grow and watch bend back toward us when we least expect it. Asterisk. She returned the terrarium to its drawer and closed it with the gentlest touch. Then turned to the next, where something delicate awaited beneath a folded cloth. Its label read, "The pillow that remembered your deepest thought." The pillow that remembered your deepest thought. The night had deepened, and a hush settled over the observatory, as though the stars themselves were exhaling. Dr. Elia moved with sleepy care. Drawn to the next drawer nestled beneath a slanted beam of moonlight. It felt softer than the others, as if its contents were already halfway dreaming. She opened it and found a neatly folded cloth, embroidered with tiny constellations in silver thread. Wrapped inside was a small, feather-stuffed pillow, worn but clean, its fabric faintly scented with lavender and thyme. Beneath it lay a set of notes and a small card written in delicate script. The label read, "Experiment number 24. The pillow that remembered your deepest thought. Dr. Kalen Noor, Nocturnal Psychographer, 1954. Dr. Elia carefully unfolded the note and began to read. Dr. Kalen had been fascinated by the mind's quietest moments. Not the ones filled with noise or clarity, but the ones between dreams and waking, where a single, unspoken thought might surface, and be lost again before morning. We think our deepest truths just before we sleep, Kalen wrote. But we forget them the moment we drift away. So she created a pillow, woven with a thin lining of pressure-sensitive ink, designed to detect the subtle neural patterns in a person's final waking thought. Not to read their mind, but to echo the shape of what was most quietly held. Each morning, if the sleeper had truly allowed their mind to open, a single phrase, brief and true, would appear faintly on the fabric. The notes included dozens of recorded thoughts. I wish I had told him I forgave him. I hope I am more than I've become. I'm not afraid to be soft anymore. That memory, it wasn't my fault. No names. No dates. Just honest, gentle sentences that someone once breathed into silence. Dr. Elia lifted the pillow, and though the writing had faded, one faint sentence remained, barely there. She never knew, but I loved her every day. She closed her eyes and held the pillow close. Not for sleep, but in gratitude for the beautiful courage it took to think something deeply, even if no one ever heard it aloud. In her journal that night, she wrote, perhaps our truest selves whisper to us in the language only sleep understands. And maybe, if we listen, they'll say just enough to help us become who we were always meant to be. She tucked the pillow gently back into its place, as if tucking in an old, beloved secret. Then she turned to the final drawer of the night. Its label shimmered quietly. The lantern that only lit the path you feared most. The lantern that only lit the path you feared most. It was nearly midnight. The stars had quieted into steady points, and the air in the observatory had taken on a silvery stillness, the kind that made everything feel both vast and close. Dr. Elia, guided now more by feeling than routine, moved toward the final row of drawers. The one she opened next felt heavier than the others, though it carried no locks, no warnings. Inside was a lantern. Simple. Hand-blown glass with a copper handle. Its wick already trimmed. Its base scuffed from travel. There was no oil inside. And yet, it looked ready to burn. Beside it, wrapped in an old expedition map, lay a journal belonging to its maker. The label was etched in tiny, uneven script. Experiment number 25. The lantern that only lit the path you feared most. Dr. Tomas Vale, luminographer of shadows, 1893. Dr. Tomas had been a wanderer. A cartographer, a poet, a reluctant scientist. He believed that most people got lost not in the world, but in themselves. And so, he created a lantern. That didn't simply light the way, but chose where to shine. It will not light what is easy, he wrote. It will not show you what you hope to see. But it will reveal what you need to walk toward, to become whole. He took it with him into old ruins, dense forests, forgotten tunnels. And each time, it flickered awake only when he paused at a threshold he wanted to avoid. A shadowed stairway. A collapsed hallway. A sealed door with memories behind it. And always, he followed. What we fear, he wrote, is often just the place where our deepest voice waits patiently to be heard. Elia held the lantern in her lap. And for the first time that evening, she hesitated. Was she brave enough to light it? Not in the observatory. Not yet. But one day soon. Perhaps. Maybe not all journeys began with certainty. Maybe some began with a breath held at the edge of what scares you. She wrote in her journal. There are lights that comfort. And then there are lights that call us forward. Into the places we've spent a lifetime avoiding. Because something beautiful is buried there. She placed the lantern back into its drawer. Not as a farewell, but as a promise. There were paths left to walk. She'd know when it was time. The drawer she didn't remember. The observatory had grown impossibly still. As if the building itself had paused to listen. Dr. Elia stood at the edge of the final row. The drawers here had all been opened, studied, treasured, and returned to silence. And yet, there was one she hadn't noticed before. Not because it was hidden, but because it was familiar. Its handle was different, slightly crooked, the way she'd once tugged too hard. And there, barely visible beneath the brass, Elia, age 12. Scratched in with a paperclip, long ago. She blinked. This was her drawer. From when she was a child. But how could that be? She knelt and opened it with slow, trembling fingers. Inside were papers, childlike sketches, diagrams of dreams. Little inventions imagined but never built. There was a tiny kaleidoscope made of colored beads and cardboard. And a letter addressed to Future me, please read when you're brave enough. She opened the letter carefully. Her own handwriting stared back, uneven, messy, honest. Dear future me. Do you still think too much? Do you still try to be good at everything so no one leaves? Do you still forget to cry? I hope you remember that it's okay to feel weird and soft and small. I hope you still believe in the stars. I hope you found someone to talk to who listens with their whole heart. If not, it's okay. I'm still here. Try again. Be kind to yourself. The good parts are not over. Love. You, before everything got complicated. Elia sat back, holding the letter to her chest. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her breath softened. The kind of breath that comes when something lost finally comes home. Beneath the letter was a single note in adult handwriting, hers, written much later. I don't remember writing this. But maybe the best parts of us never really go away. They just wait, patiently, until we're ready to hear them again. She left the drawer open. Some memories, she decided, shouldn't be tucked away anymore. That night in her journal, she wrote. We are not only made of what we've learned. We are also made of what we once believed. And dared to imagine before the world told us how. She sat in the observatory window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars blink back at her like old friends. And when she finally closed her eyes, she felt 12 again. Hopeful, messy, and full of magic. The letter that arrived before it was sent. Dawn began to whisper along the horizon. Soft light crept through the observatory's windows, painting the walls in gold and lavender. Dr. Elia stirred from a light sleep, still wrapped in her blanket. Her journal opened beside her like a companion that never judged. She stretched gently, then walked one last time across the room. Past the drawers, the lantern, the plant, the forgotten dreams rediscovered. There, sitting quietly on her desk, was something she hadn't seen before. A letter. Unstamped. Unsealed. Unaged. Written in precise script. The name on the front. To Dr. Elia Quinn. To be opened only after she remembers who she is. Her breath caught. She turned it over slowly, and opened it with a mix of wonder and unease. Inside was a single sheet. Neat. Measured. Every word chosen with care. Dear Elia. You don't know me yet. Or rather, you do. But not from memory, We met briefly, many years ago, in a quiet place you now call home. I was younger then, and so were you. And you let me sit beside you while you built a tiny model of the moon out of sugar cubes. You probably forgot. I never did. You told me then. If something disappears, it just means we're not ready to find it again yet. You were talking about a marble. But I think you meant something more. So I came back later. Left this letter. Left the keys to drawers you hadn't unlocked in years. And now, here you are. You found the experiments. You found the silence. Most of all, you found you. I never forgot the girl who believed the stars could be touched with a spoon. Or that dreams deserved blueprints. And I'm glad you never truly did either. Whatever comes next, let it be soft. Let it be strange. Let it be yours. With quiet joy. Someone who once sat beside you. Elia held the letter against her chest for a long time. Not because it hurt. But because it healed. Somehow, someone had remembered her. In the exact way she needed to be remembered. And maybe that was the real experiment all along. She stood by the window as the sun rose fully, washing everything in light. The Library of Lost Experiments wasn't just a room. It was a map of her. Of what had been forgotten. And what had been quietly waiting to be remembered. That night, her journal held only a single sentence. I am still becoming. And that is the most beautiful thing I've ever done. Asterisk.